what is the purpose of the land use map? And the purpose is to provide broad guidance for the land use patterns in the county, looking out with about a 20-year planning horizon. And essentially, this is a key centerpiece of Plan 2040. The land use plan is based in the Plan 2040 vision and goals and policies and the development policy area maps that you all have drafted. And it's also informed by input from the citizens and from stakeholders throughout the process. As a reminder, the land use map does set the stage for zoning. So when the land use map is adopted by Plan 2040, it's implemented through several tools, including zoning. The zoning map ultimately has to be consistent with the land use map, and that's done primarily through comprehensive zoning. Subdivision and development regulations will also help implement the land use plan, and the plan helps then guide public funding and investments as well. So next slide, please. So this is a big picture overview of how the staff developed the land use map. We completed a comprehensive analysis of the entire county using the 2009 General Development Plan's land use plan as a baseline to consider development patterns, observations, and public input. And what we did was we identified where there were inconsistencies between the existing land use, what's on the ground today, inconsistencies between that and the planned land use designation, the zoning, the development policies areas map, in order to develop a list of recommended changes from the 2009 land use designations. The changes in the draft land use designation from the 2009 land use are recommended based on the criteria that you see on the screen before you. So is it consistent with the Plan 2040 vision and the development policy area? We also looked at zoning, both the current zoning and in some cases were there past zoning decisions and rationale that needed to be considered. We looked at the existing use of the property and the surrounding planned uses. We looked at sewer service, the priority preservation area, and we looked at whether changing the land use would provide a public benefit, and we also considered public input on a particular area or property. So next slide, please. So this resulting draft planned land use, it has these categories, and this is pretty much the makeup of the county in this draft land use map. It's a snapshot broken out by the different land uses. And so for the entire county, the draft land use plan places just under 15%, of the area in conservation. Over a third of the county is in rural land use. 28% of the county ends up in low density or low medium density residential. And then just over 8% is in commercial, industrial, mixed use, or town center categories. Next slide, please. So there were several changes. I want to go through kind of the broad types of land use changes that are reflected in this draft. And the first are the land use category or designation changes that result from really revising the framework of the land use categories for this update. There's a new conservation land use designation that will replace the natural features designation. And this will apply to publicly and privately owned land that's conserved into perpetuity, such as properties and land trusts, platted floodplains, passive open space that's adjacent to platted floodplains and passive parks. And other sensitive areas like the floodplains or wetlands that are not currently protected into perpetuity and or may not be field verified currently, they're protected through various county and state regulations and mapped as the resource sensitive policy area that Holly just spoke about. For public and private outdoor recreation areas like ball fields and golf courses, campgrounds, etc., there is now an open space land use designation. And both the open space and the conservation designations will need to be expanded during the region planning process when we're able to get some fine-tuned input on designating both active and passive recreation areas. Publicly owned properties are now in a public use category. This replaces the government and institutional category from the 2009 GDP. What we had found in looking at the 2009 land use was that there were a lot of inconsistencies in how some of those areas were designated in the 2009 plan. And some of the private institutions that have been designated governmental or institutional in the 2009 plan, those since have changed use. And so putting only public properties in the public use category will hopefully better reflect a longer term reality. We no longer separate out the transportation and utility rights of way. So this category has been eliminated in this land use plan. We're still working through the technical aspects of this though. So when you all get into the online tool that we give you to look at, these are going to show up as null with no land use assigned, and we're still working through that. But we didn't see any value to having a right-of-way, transportation or utility right-of-way separate land use, and so that's been eliminated. The low density, low medium density, and medium density residential designations, those were given a pretty comprehensive analysis looking at the existing on the ground built density and also considering their zoning. And so we sort of reapplied those designations to help resolve some of the inconsistencies between those things. So for example, a lot of the single family residential neighborhoods in Brooklyn Park, just as an example, they had been in the 2009 plan in medium density residential. But their built density is really more like low medium density residential, and so we're showing that in this plan for areas like that, and we sort of did a similar analysis for a lot of different areas. The 4 mixed use designations: mixed use residential, mixed use employment, mixed use commercial, and mixed use transit. Those have been combined into one total mixed use category. And then finally, the small business category, land use category from 2009, that has been incorporated into the commercial land use category. So those are the land use category changes that you will see. Next slide. And then there are some fairly broad, what we're calling consistency changes. One type is looking at areas where the 2009 land use plan did not accurately reflect the existing built densities and development types, and where these existing uses, we're expecting them to remain throughout the next 20 years. So for those areas, a more realistic land use designation was applied. And this impacted a lot of the planned unit developments, multifamily developments, and townhouses that are already built on the ground and they're likely to remain. Another type of change was just simply changes where the 2009 land use didn't align well with the existing parcel boundaries. And so we resolved those issues. And then changes where the planned land use designation doesn't really align with current zoning, but where we expect that zoning is going to remain in place in the future. So we've proposed a more appropriate land use designation for those. Next slide. So there are a handful of what we're calling just staff recommended changes. These are a little bit more significant, and some of these are changes so that an area can be more consistent with the existing use that's on the ground and that's expected to remain in the future. There were 54 of those changes in the county, and then changes in the planned land use that will help a property or an area better align with the development policy area that's been drafted. And there were 12 of those changes in total. Next slide. We did look at and consider all of the land use change applications that we got. So we got about 180, I think it was 189 applications that we got. 7 of them were withdrawn early in the process for various reasons. And so ultimately we evaluated 182 land use change applications. And of those, 14 of those applications were really just requests that the landowner wanted to maintain their existing land use, and we supported that. So the other recommendations that we have made on the others, we've supported 12 requests to simply better align the land use with the parcel boundary. We've supported 58 of the land use requests, and then we recommend not supporting 58 of the land use requests. For 10 of them, we felt that there was a different land use than what was requested that would be a little bit more appropriate and would fit better with the vision and the goals and the policies that are drafted now. So for 10 of them, we recommended a different land use than what was requested. And then for 33 of them, we really recommended maintaining the current land use and reassess during the region plan when we can have a process with a little bit more community input on the ground for some of those applications.